tell us more about what's happening right now in Gaza? Any interesting things that are not on the news? Anything that you kind of like want to throw at them? This is a group of teens who come and learn about Israel and learn how to advocate. So they're pretty sophisticated in their knowledge, I would say.
Okay,
So,
good. Well, what I like to talk about most is the things that nobody talks about, things that nobody thinks about. So I'll tell you a few of the things off the bat that people in the Jewish world or the Israel advocacy world are all talking about. But then maybe we can get from there into some of the really subtle things, and you can ask some questions. And sometimes I'm on these debate shows on TV, and you have to talk really fast and just make your point. But when I really like this because I get to talk to you guys and actually just explain things without having to be pressed for time or argue against someone. But I'll tell you, right now in Gaza, there were on last. On March 31st, there were about 30,000 people came out for a big demonstration, and then on Friday, another 20,000 came out. And the demonstration, a lot of people in the press were calling it a protest, but it's not like what you think of when you think of a protest. It's not like Occupy Wall Street. They were burning tires. They were throwing Molotov cocktails, which are like fire bombs. There was at least one or two incidents where they actually fired guns at the IDF, which is a very serious thing. I mean, firing a gun at a country's army. But mostly the big thing is they were trying to breach the. Yeah.
And the protest was at the border of Gaza with Israel or in the Gaza city? Like where was the protest physically?
It's right at the border. The border has a fence. And so you guys already went through the difference between 2005 and 2007, right?
Right.
Did you cover that? So, 2005, Israel left Gaza. There was no fence. There was no blockade. Hamas took over in a street war against Fatah, which is the other major Palestinian party. And then they started launching rockets and carrying out terror attacks. So Israel built a fence and also had a blockade because Iran was moving really sophisticated weaponry in there. So that's how the blockade came to be. And Hamas is on the terror list of almost every country in the Western world. They're on the same list that ISIS is on. And so when I say that they're terrorists, it's not my opinion. That's the opinion of most of the Western world. So yeah, right on the border, part of the point of these protests was to try and breach the border for people to get through. So they'd come up with wire cutters, with plastic explosives. They were using the smoke from the tires to create cover. Now, there were 30,000 people there. Not all 30,000 were trying to do these things. In fact, not most of them were trying to do these things. But Hamas was using the civilian population as cover to allow their operatives to come in and do some of these violent things. And so the IDF had snipers there with orders to fire on anyone who's trying to get through the fence. Because when they get through, they're coming through with weapons, and there are Israeli towns nearby. And their goal is to get into these towns and to hurt people. And they've tried it before with tunnels during the last Gaza war, and they used to do it with rockets. So while people are trying to get through, the IDF shot some of the people who were either shooting at them or were carrying out other violent acts or trying to break through the fence. The total number of people, as of last week, the total number of people who had died was, at first the number was 16, then it went up to 19. But strong evidence came out that at least 15 of them were members of Hamas or Global Jihad or the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades or other. These are all organizations that are on everybody's terror list, on the same lists as ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And so that was 15 out of 19. And the other 4, we don't know for sure that they were civilians. They just haven't confirmed it yet. And when I say that this was confirmed, I mean even Hamas was confirming it because they were taking credit for the courage of their operatives. So there is no argument that these people were terrorists. Now, since then, since Friday, the total number of casualties, the last figure I saw was 29. I heard someone somewhere else say 31. It's still early. We still don't have all the numbers in. One of the people who died was a Palestinian journalist, And it's not entirely clear why, but it is possible that the IDF may have made a mistake. But the reason I told you the story before about the combat soldiers that I met is because it relates to this. Israel's rules of engagement in this situation are that they can only shoot at people who are trying to either cross the border or who have weapons and are using those weapons. And even then, only when they're within a certain distance of the border, 300 meters if they have a weapon, 100 meters if they don't have a weapon. And they've made all these rules very well known to the people in Gaza too, and encourage them to stay out of that area. Now, when the soldiers, I had a conversation with a friend. It was a difficult conversation. My friend was saying to me, Israel is so powerful, and the Palestinian people, they're fighting with nothing but rocks and stones, which of course isn't true because they had gunfire and fire bombs and plastic explosives. But Israel has all the power here. And I said, in this situation, Hamas has all the power that matters. They have the power to not do something violent or to do something violent. Israel's in a situation where Israel can only respond to what Hamas does. But all the violence could just not happen at all. All Hamas would have to do is to just choose to not do it. And she said to me, are you seriously telling me that if Hamas did nothing, that all of those Israeli snipers would just stand there on the border and do nothing? And I said, that is absolutely what I'm telling you, 120% for sure. Partly it's because of the rules of engagement that I just told you, but partly it's because, and if you're watching the recording, it's what I said just before the recording started, the Israelis I know who are combat soldiers are thoughtful, serious people, and they're not out looking to hurt people, and they're not angry, and very frequently, and this is something that happens all the time, they'll be in a situation where they see someone maybe who has a weapon, maybe doesn't, and they have to decide, do I shoot or do I not shoot? And a lot of times it's not a situation like Gaza where there's a fence and they're standing really far back. It could be a situation where they're going to arrest somebody and they're on a street somewhere and someone's nearby and they think they're drawing a weapon. Do they have a weapon or not? Well, you don't know for sure. So what do? If you shoot, you might shoot an innocent civilian. But if you don't shoot, you're putting your life in danger because if you're wrong, that person might shoot you. And my friends who are combat soldiers over and over and over again take that extra moment and hesitate and wait and risk their own lives in order to avoid even the possibility of killing someone who even potentially could be a civilian. That's the kind of personalities. Now, that maybe doesn't apply to every single human being. I mean, humans are humans, but it certainly applies to everyone that I've met. And in the West Bank, they have protests every Friday in a number of different towns. Usually they're nonviolent, but sometimes they are. So for that reason, the IDF is present there. And since they're nonviolent most of the time, the IDF just stands there and does nothing. And so not only am I saying that the IDF would do nothing if Hamas didn't do something violent, but the IDF does do nothing every single Friday in several towns all around the West Bank. And it happens week after week after week. But you never hear about it because, nobody's getting killed. So it's not dramatic. It's not headlines. So my point in all of this is that there are a lot of innocent people in Gaza, even in this situation. There are some people who are carrying out violent acts. And as best as I can tell, based on the people I know and the information I see, Israel is working very hard to be tremendously careful in an almost impossible situation. And the IDF is still investigating what happened with this journalist. But we know the vast majority of people who were hurt or killed were doing something violent at the time. And it's possible the IDF made a mistake, but I would be very surprised if a soldier had shot the journalist on purpose just to be harmful.
Great, thank you.
So, yeah.
Questions, comments so far? No. How is you're in Tel Aviv, right? If I remember correctly.
I was in Tel Aviv for 4 years. Now I'm in Jerusalem.
Ah, you made it even bigger, Aliyah.
Yes. Well.
I would assume that the smoke from the tires makes for really bad air. Are you guys getting anything that people are, suffering?
Well, I wouldn't because I'm in a different part of the country. The day that they started, there were some burning tires the first day, which was
Friday.
March 31st, but there were a lot more last Friday on April 6th, and those they said their plan was to burn 10,000 tires. I don't know if they actually burned 10,000, but it may have been. That's a lot of tires. And I don't know if you saw some pictures already. There was just, it looked like those old pictures from the Iraq War when they blew up the oil wells and huge clouds of black smoke. Israel got very lucky. The wind on that particular day was blowing away from Israel. But unfortunately, life in Gaza is not so great for reasons that I could get into in a moment if you're interested. But life in Gaza just got a little bit worse because now that smoke is blowing all over Gaza. And it's harming the people in Gaza. I mean, everything that Hamas has done in the past week has really only served to harm Palestinian people in Gaza. Right. And the difficult thing is that when you look at the media, you see them using words like protest. You see them using words like unarmed. And it's just doesn't really reflect the situation, which doesn't mean Palestinians are bad guys. But the Palestinians are sort of getting the worst of both worlds because they live under Hamas and they're suffering from the things Hamas is doing. And Israelis, for the most part, are pretty well protected from that.
I know you're often debate Gideon Levy, I think his name is, from
yes.
Peace Now, Shalom Akshav.
No. That was Yariv Oppenheimer. Gideon Levy he's a columnist with Haaretz.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I debate both of them frequently.
Well,
though.
So neither of them. What, you're going to go on TV tomorrow. What do you think their arguments are going to be?
Well, I was on with Yariv Oppenheimer just last week. And you guys can see I think I sent you the link. You guys can. So you can show you guys can look at it if you're curious. Yariv's arguments were, look, people can, you'll see if you see the clip, but he said, people come in, they're unarmed, they have nothing but empty hands. And I said, yeah, except for the guns and the knives and the tires and the Molotov cocktails and the fire bombs and the plastic explosives. And he says to me, hey, with all due respect, I let you talk, you don't interrupt me. And then he goes on, and these people were just unarmed, and I interrupted him again because I don't mind him making his point, but I'm not going to let him sit there and say something that's just blatantly untrue. And that's mostly the argument here, is that Israel is big and powerful and is shooting against unarmed people. But as I said, in this situation, Gaza has the power that matters, which is the power to just stop. And Israel's being quite restrained from all the figures we see. 30,000 people, 29 people were killed, which is a very small percentage. And out of those, almost all of them were members of these terror groups. And then this constant statement, it's unarmed, it's a protest. I saw one newspaper referred to as a sit-in, which is, I don't know, like something you do at camp. And of course, that's it just gives a very skewed picture of what's going on here. I think if you can have a conversation where you're just talking about reality, then it already changes the picture considerably. And when we talk to people, it's possible to express a lot of sympathy for ordinary Palestinians while at the same time sticking to the reality of what's happening without changing that. But could I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
When you guys are interact with people, everyone here is, what city are we in now? We're in California, I know that, right?
We're in the Bay Area, Palo Alto.
Okay, so you're in Palo Alto. You're pretty close to San Francisco, right?
Right.
When you guys interact with your friends, do you find that there are a lot of people who have some bad feelings toward Israel, or do they just not really care? Do you find that you're in conversations that are difficult or uncomfortable? Like, what's it generally like?
Come closer because he won't hear it. Yeah, well, you're the first.
All right. I think you might have to come up to the microphone so I can hear you.
Okay.
Around? Go this way. Should put it like a chair or something.
Where's the microphone? Do you hear me?
It doesn't matter. Just here.
I can hear you. I can hear you well.
Get your face in there.
So my friends really, they're not, the people who I'm friends with, they are more right wing, they are true supporters of Israel. All of my other friends who really aren't like to the right of the political spectrum, they don't really know anything about Israel. They don't say anything about Israel. But there are a lot of adults. So for example, my wrestling coach, he used to like we have dual meets for wrestling, and I have my Club Z sweatshirt that I used to wear to the dual meets. And he told me to stop wearing them last year because, well, Israelis are killing innocent Palestinians apparently. But
Yeah.
eventually, like,
I mean, did he say that?
Yeah, and
Okay.
so eventually he actually did some research on his own. I didn't even tell him to, and we were driving to like Bakersfield, and he was. We were talking about like gun control and everything, and I was like, well, yeah, the teacher. What?
Okay,
Okay, so I was talking to him. Well, he was a cop basically. So I was talking to him about gun control, and I was like, well, yeah, you know, like all the teachers in like Israel, they're all armed, and he's like, yeah, of course. Well, they're getting attacked. I see what you're saying now about Israel. So really, I think they're just like people in California. They're just being misled, but some people who actually do their own research will like find out the actual truth about Israel. So,
Yeah. Okay. What's your name?
Ron.
Ron. Okay. Thanks, Ron.
Yep.
Anybody else? Sure.
Does anybody else have sort of a different feeling about what your interactions are usually like, or do you think that you kind of agree with Ron?
Hold on, Karen is on her way.
Hi.
Hi, Karen.
Hi. I would say a lot of the same things as Ron. The people that know what they're talking about know what they're talking about, and everyone else like has slogans in their head that they sometimes will say without really understanding what they mean, like oppressed Palestinians, occupation, and stuff like that. But like the second you question it, they're like, "Wait, I don't know. Like I have no idea what I'm saying." So they think they have opinions, but they really don't. If that makes sense.
I see. Yeah. So sort of like. Well, but it sounds like their opinions aren't like super passionate. They just kind of think that they know something, and once you get into it, they realize they just don't really know.
I think that they think that they're being like social justice warriors by saying stuff like this, but they don't take the time to really know what that means, so they don't know that they're actually on the wrong side of it.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah.
See, I always say if you care enough about a topic to have a strong opinion, you'd think you'd care enough to learn something about it.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you don't have to know everything about everything in the world. But if you don't know, like say, I don't know. Like if I asked you right now, what do you think about the conflict in the Kashmir? You know, who's really on the right side of that?
No
You're like,
idea what that
I don't know. I don't know.
Okay, we have one more student, Ellie.
Hi, Ellie.
Hi. So I actually have a different thing. At my school, we have kids who sort of try really hard to get like the facts about their opinions. So there's this one kid, he's a model UN kid, you know, like he does a lot of his own research about stuff, you know, very active, but like he's on the left side of the political spectrum. So what he does is, so I was talking to him about Israel. I was looking at his Spanish project, and he was saying stuff like, I want Israel to stop like cutting off electricity in Gaza and stuff, and I want the harm to stop here. And then so I was talking to him. I was like, do you actually like know about this? And he was like, yes, I researched this. The UN is doing all of this stuff, and Israel is, you know, human rights violation towards Gaza. So like some people actually do like the research. But I think it was easy, and so there was an Israeli girl sitting at the table, and so I invited her to join the conversation. But she didn't really know what was going on in Israel with the humanitarian aid.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you know, Israel's a real country, and people here are normal, and it means not everybody really knows or cares about politics. Thanks, that was Ellie, right?
Yeah.
Do you guys want to hear about the electricity thing?
Yeah, that
Yeah.
would be great if you could, you know, talk about life in Gaza as we know it, and what is Israel's role in Gaza and in their lives?
Yeah.
in electricity.
Well, first of
Water.
all, Gaza is an interesting place. It does have poverty. It does have areas that were destroyed in the last war and haven't been rebuilt. It also has 5-star hotels. It has 4-star restaurants. It has resorts. If you go, just try this out. Go on Airbnb or what's the TripAdvisor. Go on TripAdvisor and just look for like restaurants or hotels in Gaza or in Gaza City. And you'll be like shocked at what you see. Like it's beautiful stuff there. And there's also not so beautiful stuff there. It's like it's got a little bit of everything. It depends where the photographer stands. But there is a problem with electricity right now. This is where it gets a little complicated. And when you're explaining this to your friends, maybe you won't get into quite this level of detail, but I think it helps to know it. Officially, there is only one government for the Palestinian people, and that's called the Palestinian Authority Government, or the PA. They're ruled by the Fatah political party, or in English we say Fatah, and they're controlled by Mahmoud Abbas, who is in the 13th year of his 4-year term, because they just never hold elections. And he has physical control in the West Bank. You guys have a map there, right? You know the difference between the West Bank and Gaza, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So he has physical control in the West Bank. In Gaza, Hamas, as you know, in 2007 ended up taking control. And they're an internationally recognized terror organization. And so no people who recognize them as a terror group cannot do business with them directly. It would be sort of like if somebody in Iraq presented the U.S. border control with a passport that was issued by ISIS, because they're in an area that's controlled by ISIS. Like America cannot accept a passport from ISIS, because then it's like recognizing that ISIS is a country and giving them like the actual diplomatic status. So they cannot do that with Hamas. So all the interaction with Gaza has to go through the Palestinian Authority, because that is the government of the Palestinian people. I mean, another way of putting it is it would almost be like recognizing, I don't know, the neo-Nazis or the KKK and interacting with them directly. If like Germany or, I don't know, Canada interacted with them directly. You can't do that. You've got to go through the U.S. government. So because of that, all of the electricity, all of the water, all of the international aid goes through the Palestinian Authority government. The Palestinian Authority and Hamas are having this big feud. They've been trying to kill each other forever. They keep talking about having a reconciliation agreement and having a unity government where they get back together, but it keeps not happening. So right now they're in this huge feud, and the Palestinian Authority decided one way to pressure Gaza was to say, we are no longer going to pay the electrical bill. We're no longer going to transfer over the money, and we're no longer going to allow electricity to be given to you. And so the Palestinian Authority made that decision. Now, some of that electricity comes through Israel, but Israel cannot give anything directly to Hamas. It has to go through the Palestinian Authority. Otherwise, you've just recognized a terror group as a real government. And the Palestinian Authority has chosen to not let it through. So right now in Gaza, they're getting something like 4 hours of electricity a day. And the Palestinian Authority is threatening to cut that down. But all the problems in Gaza with the electricity, with the water, it's all the Palestinian Authority pressuring Hamas. And that's a lot of the reason why what we're seeing this week is happening, is that Hamas is getting desperate because they're running out of money, and the people in Gaza are getting to the point where it's going to be hard to control them. So Hamas figured if they can do something, do some kind of incitement against Israel and get some dramatic photos of people getting shot, it will energize the people in Gaza to be more supportive of them. It will energize the international community, and it will also put pressure on the Fatah party that controls the government to treat them with a little more, I suppose respect is the word, but to give them, to lay off of all the pressure that they're putting on them, because they would then be seen as heroes, and it's a lot harder to pressure them in that way when they're being seen in such a positive light. So that's the electricity, the water, and also how we got to this situation. And also there was a situation a couple of years ago where in Gaza they were complaining that Israel had opened up all of its dams intentionally to flood Gaza. And it turned out that in that part of the country, Israel doesn't even have any dams. So there's a lot of misinformation flying around there. So this is the complicated thing that happened. And, it makes me think of this story. When I was living in Chicago, I was working as a lawyer, and I had this client who was a musician. And so I met her late at night at like 1 a.m. in a cocktail bar, because that's when you have a meeting with a client who's a musician. And she had this new boyfriend who was Palestinian. And it was important for me that we have a respectful relationship. So I wanted to sort of explain where I was coming from to make sure that that she respected me, but I wasn't going to hide who I am. And so I explained this whole thing to her, and it took me a long time, and I didn't really have the knowledge, but I worked very hard at it. After about a half hour, I'm trying to be respectful of her boyfriend, saying, it's more complicated than you realize, this and that. And I finally got there. And then a fan came up and saw her. And he's like, oh, my God, can I take a picture with you? She's like, sure. Why don't you come down, join us at our table, have a drink? So he sits down. She says, well, what do you do for a living? And he says, oh, well, I'm a reporter for Al Jazeera. I'm like, oh, my God. And then he just like started saying all these things. just completely destroyed everything I built up in the last 20 minutes. And I'm thinking, I know what he's saying is wrong, but I don't know what to say about it. Like, I didn't have that knowledge. So a lot of times now when I talk to people like you guys, I just sort of have this image in my mind that maybe you're sometimes in a situation where you want to say something, but you don't know what to say. And my hope is that I'm kind of contributing something to that. And hopefully it'll be useful to you.
That's the whole reason Club Z was started, literally. So we can educate them before they get to places where they have to literally defend themselves vis-a-vis defending Israel.
Because you guys are going to where's everyone going to college? You guys know yet?
So this is so they're 9 to 12 graders. So we have a couple of seniors. Karen, do you know where you're going?
Not officially, but most likely Case Western in Ohio.
Case Western in Ohio.
Okay, Case Western. Okay.
Valerie, you're going to Santa Clara University. Ali, where are you going? Vanderbilt. All right. We need to revive SSI there. All right. And a few kids are still waiting for the decisions. This is like the crunch time for them. This is hard.
I see. So that's why everyone's laughing a little bit.
Right.
Well, none of those schools, as far as I know, have a reputation as being difficult places for these sorts of things. So, but you never know. Things could come up. It's good to know how to communicate and how to do it in a way where you're not going to ruin your friendships, but maybe, inspire people to come around and think a little bit and connect with you on a deeper level. People always say, I don't like to talk politics because it ruins friendships. But I've sometimes found if you do it right, it actually can deepen friendships because you're sharing something that's important to you. And if they're an open-minded person, they'll maybe connect with you in that deeper way. And, it can build stronger friendships if you do it right. It doesn't work for everybody.
Absolutely.
There are going to be some people who just are like angry. And by the way, something I learned, I always thought I was liberal. And I still think I think I'm liberal. But then suddenly I discovered that like being pro-Israel makes me conservative. And I'm like, how in the world did that happen? Like, it shouldn't be a liberal conservative thing. Like, Israel is what it is. Like, being pro-Sweden doesn't make me liberal or conservative. And Israel shouldn't be that way either. And, Israel, when you think of liberal values, Israel has, and I'm saying this not because I assume that you guys are liberal or conservative, but you might talk to people maybe who are liberal and think, I'm against Israel because I'm liberal. And they should know that Israel has universal health care. It has almost always had it. That up until the 90s, Israel was a completely socialist country, and even now it's still a sort of semi-socialist country and semi-capitalist. Israel has some of the strictest gun control in the world. Not only is buying a gun highly controlled, you can't buy bullets. Like, if you own a gun, you're allowed a certain number of bullets, and if you want to buy new ones, you have to show what you did with the old ones. If you shot someone in self-defense, you need to show the police report in order to buy a new bullet to replace the one you shot. Like, that's how strict it is. Tel Aviv has the biggest gay pride parade in the Middle East, and gay rights is like gay people are very common and accepted more in Tel Aviv than in Jerusalem because it's a little bit of a conservative city, but it's nothing like a place in the Arab world where being gay can get you like arrested or hanged or shot. And gay they don't have gay marriage in Israel yet, but you never know, it may change. But Israel does have a law that if you're married somewhere else and it's accepted in another country, then Israel has to recognize that marriage. So there are gay couples in Israel that are married and their marriage is recognized by Israel because they got married, say, like in America, and then they moved to Israel. And, if you're married, you're married. So there are gay marriages in Israel. They just haven't, you just can't have a gay marriage in Israel yet, but that might change. And in a lot of other ways, Israel it completely embodies liberal values. So if somebody really believes that they're liberal, they absolutely should be supporting Israel and absolutely should be really questioning some of these other countries, and particularly the governments in the West Bank and in Gaza that embody the most conservative isn't the word, the most illiberal values that you can possibly imagine. Throwing people off rooftops because they're gay, horrible racism. If in the West Bank, if you sell land to a Jew, that's punishable by death. It's a worse penalty than the punishment for rape. And Anyway, the point is, you can do some more research on it if you like. But if you do engage with someone who's liberal about Israel, one way to do it might be to introduce them to that whole concept.
Awesome. Hold on. I have a quick question. I saw a picture. There was a photo somebody posted that there is literally a traffic jam of news vans on the way to the Gaza border, because all of the journalists now, this is where they want to go. This is where they want to be. Can you tell us a little bit about how journalists work, how they end up in Israel, and what what is their role, and how does the news get decimated?
Well, there's these days a lot of news gets spread through what's called wire services. There are these companies called there's three major ones: Associated Press or AP, Reuters, and AFP, which is Agence France Presse, which is I pronounced that wrong, but it's a French company. I just call it AFP. And what happens is a lot of newspapers and magazines, some of them actually have reporters who come out to places like Israel or other places in the world, but most of them take a lot of their international news from these wire services. So if the Associated Press puts out a story about Israel, that story will get reprinted in literally thousands of publications all over the world. And it can be a little misleading because you see a story in one place and you see it in another, and you see it in a third, and you think, well, this must be true because I'm seeing the same story printed by every publication everywhere. And the truth is, you might actually just be seeing the same story that's just being reprinted over and over. So when you look at a story, there's what we call the byline. The byline has the name of the journalist. It'd be like by, and if it's me, it would be by Daniel Pomerantz. And a lot of times in the byline, it'll say by Associated Press or by AP. Or if I'm working for AP, it might say by Daniel Pomerantz, comma, Associated Press. So always take a look for that, and it can give you some sense of where the story is coming from. Israel is a particularly tempting place for journalists because you can sound like you're in the middle of the action. You can take photographs of what looks like combat with the smoke and everything, and yet you're in a country that's tremendously safe. It's not like you're going into Syria. And so Israel does get a little more coverage than other places for that reason, which is, can be a good thing and it can be a bad thing. There's, I think, less coverage now than there was, say, 10 or 20 years ago. But there's still a lot more than other places in the world where things happen that people should know about, but it just doesn't get covered because it's either dangerous or it's difficult, or journalists can get sometimes killed for saying the wrong things, and so they don't want to say that, whereas in Israel, you can say whatever you want and not be in any danger for that. So those are some things to be aware of. Oh, another thing I wanted to add, Israel moves 800 trucks of food and medical supplies into Gaza per day. Every day, 800 trucks go through. Millions of tons go through every year. And that hasn't stopped. Even with all the stuff going on right now this week, they're still moving. It's not exactly its average 800 tons. Some days might be, or 800 trucks. Some days might be more, some days might be less. But they're still moving that average of 800 trucks of food and medicine into Gaza every day, and that hasn't stopped. So the journalists, they sometimes they hang out in coffee shops in Tel Aviv if they're lazy. Sometimes they go out to the scene and take some pictures. We try to interact with them as much as we can. We have Honest Reporting, who I work for. We tend to critique the media when they get something wrong. But we have another branch of our a nonprofit called Media Central, and their job is to help journalists find the story. So if a journalist says, how do I get to Gaza? How do I find a translator? I don't know what to write this week. Is there a good story you can suggest to me? They try to help them do their jobs, and they try to direct them to stories that don't get written about but should. Like we've gotten a lot of press about how Israel is treating injured people from Syria in Israeli hospitals, and that's getting press now. But it wouldn't have if it weren't for groups like Media Central really working to make that happen. I could go on about press for a long time because it's a really complicated field. But I think I'd rather just sort of respond to if you guys have something that you're specifically wondering about, because I could go on about it forever, and I don't want to bore you.
Questions? Comments? There's a question or comment.
Yeah.
I don't really know how to phrase it, but what's next with this? What's the end
I can't hear you.
The question is, $1 million question is, what do you think is next? How do we resolve this if there is a resolution? It seems that every 2 years, right, we have a flare up of Gaza. What do you think it will take to sort of like come, something that will bring some kind of resolution?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'll give you what I think my answer is, but it doesn't mean that I'm right. I think what it takes to have a resolution is to recognize, people talk about Israel giving back the West Bank or giving back Gaza. The West Bank, more than Gaza, never really was closely connected to Jewish history, but the West Bank until 1949 was always called Judea and Samaria. It has a very deep connection to Jewish heritage. And I'm not one of those people who says, oh, it's our birthright, so we have to have it. But I do think we have to recognize that it has an important place in Jewish history, and Palestinians feel a strong emotional and historical connection too. And both sides have to recognize that each one has that connection. And for Israel to give up any part of the West Bank is a painful compromise, which doesn't mean Israel shouldn't do it, but Palestinians have to understand that Israel is doing something that is painful, and that you have to have a lot of respect for that pain. And I think when you understand that you're never going to get absolutely everything you want, there's a little more room to move forward. But a lot of Palestinians feel that the West Bank has no connection to Judaism, and there's a lot of propaganda in the Palestinian territories that Israel has no connection to Judaism, that it was just created because Europeans felt guilty about the Holocaust, which also never happened. Somehow you can believe both things at once. Not all Palestinians believe that, but a lot of Palestinians hear it, and it's in the schools and the textbooks, so it's a difficult thing. But I'll tell you, there's a story that for me captures everything about the conflict in a nutshell, where it is, why it exists, and how to bring it to an end. And that is, there was a shooting about a year or two ago at a place called the Sarona Marketplace. Do you guys remember that? Does that ring a bell for you at all? Well, Sarona is like it's like a food court, like you'd have at a shopping mall, but it's like pretty upscale. And so people go there, and it's in Tel Aviv, and people go there and they have like meals or coffee. And some terrorists came with semi-automatics and started shooting up the whole food court, and 4 Israelis were killed, and a bunch of others were injured. And after that, Israel didn't really know whether it was just the beginning of more attacks or what was actually happening. So the first thing they did is they closed off all of the entryways into Israel. Did you guys ever talk about walls and fences and all of that sort of thing? Do you understand how that works?
Yeah, we just actually last time we talked about the barrier, the wall, the checkpoints, the whole shebang.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you know that until the Second Intifada, that barrier wasn't there. And then when the Second Intifada happened, that was about 2000 to 2005 roughly, and a lot of people were being killed in suicide bombings. Israel built that barrier, which 95% of it is a fence, about 5% of it is a wall in the places that have the most civilians nearby. And once Israel built that, it reduced the number of terror attacks by 90%, and that was right at the beginning, and it's gone down even more since then. And then that's huge. It's tremendously important. But on the other hand, it does make life difficult for Palestinians. They can't always get to where they need to go. I have friends. I was just hiking this weekend in the north, up near Lebanon and Syria, but not in Lebanon and Syria, but in the north of Israel. And my friends who I was with were talking about how there's this Palestinian guy they know who's never seen the ocean, and they really want to find a way to get him across the security barrier and bring him out to the beach. And it's a sad thing, but at the same time, you can't just take away those fences because people are going to die. So it's a hard thing even for Israelis. So what happened was, after this attack at Sarona, they closed off all the barriers and wouldn't let people through, which was hard because people need to get to work, they need to visit family. And what happened was, some of these communities that were closed off are technically within the municipality of Jerusalem. So some of these Palestinian community leaders from those towns, they went to the mayor of Jerusalem. His name's Nir Barkat. And they went to Mayor Barkat and they said to him, listen, we can't function. Our community is being just like clobbered here. And you have to open this up. And Barkat said, and these are like in Palestinian society, the local town elder has a lot of influence. You know, it's even more sometimes than the elected political leader is the town elders, like the people who have really that like, sort of family influence. And so Nir Barkat, the mayor, said to these community leaders, if you can promise me that you will personally take responsibility for making sure that nobody hurts anyone, then I'll open the passages and they can come through again. And so they agreed to that, and the mayor opened the passages, and it worked. And even while passageways were closed for a lot of other communities, they were open for these communities. People were coming and going, and nobody was getting hurt, which is basically, that's what coexistence is. And I said to the mayor's office, that's such an amazing story. I want to write an article about it. Would you tell me which communities were involved? And maybe you could even set up an interview for me with the community leaders. And they said to me, we can't do that because if anybody finds out which communities were involved and which community leaders were involved, they're going to be in danger. They actually risk their lives by doing something like that because there are other Palestinians who would kill them for that. And so to me, that's the situation in a nutshell. Israelis want to take down fences and walls. And there are many Palestinians who want to just live a normal life. Some of them like Jews and like Israel. Some of them don't. But you don't have to like Jews or like Israel to just want to live a normal life, to just want to tell your community, look, just don't go hurting people. And there are a lot of Palestinians who want to do that. But the Palestinians who do want to do that risk their lives by saying it out loud. And that's the situation. So how you get through that is the tricky thing. I'm not exactly sure how, but the elements are there and the people are there and the feelings are there. But also Israel has the advantage of being a free society. We can say whatever we want. We can argue as much as we want. But in Palestinian society, you have to create a safe environment where people who want to coexist can do that without getting killed for it. So that's kind of how I see it. I know it's not an answer, but I don't know, sometimes having the humility to know that you don't know everything is the best thing you can do. So at least I see that as being the direction.
Right. Well, I think what would help is for people to read up or watch numerous videos. Mordecai Kedar from Bar Ilan, he talks about tribalism. And that's really, it's still at the root of the society of the Middle East. And that's exactly what you said, that the town elders can guarantee safety, then everything is okay.
Yeah. And Kedar is really something. He's a firecracker. Have you ever seen that famous segment where he was debating in Al Jazeera?
Yes, of course.
He had that great line, "Are you saying the Quran is wrong?" Right. And he completely paralyzed that news anchor.
Right. Okay. Few more questions for Daniel, if you guys have any questions. No?
Well, listen, guys, yeah. I'm always available. You can share my email address with the group. If you ever have a question or you want to get in touch, you can always feel free to contact me. You can check out the stuff we write. It's at honestreporting.com, and we're always right now we're writing stuff every day about the situation, and every time things are going on, we write stuff. If you see a news story that you think is wrong or that you're not sure about, you can write to us and ask us questions. We can help you research it or help you get some results. So we're really, we're here for you. And also, don't be afraid to read up on what liberal voices in Israel are saying too. And it's a complicated picture here. It's a real country with real people and all sorts of political leanings. So read up on all of it and read things that you disagree with too. And help try to let yourself understand what other people are thinking and why, because then that gives you the tools to communicate with them. And just keep in touch. We're here for you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks,
Daniel. Guys. Good luck with everything. So nice to see you, Masha.
Very good to see you. All right. Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.